Hi, this is Kevin Baumer, Deputy Director of the Colorado Municipal League, and in a moment you'll hear from my colleagues. Welcome to this week's edition of the CML Statehouse Report. We're just past the quarter point of the session. There have been 404 bills introduced, which is a little more than half of what we expect to be introduced for the entire session. And at this point, CML is tracking 65 of 166 Senate bills and 82 of 238 House bills. Currently, we have a support list of 23 bills and an opposed list of 15 bills. You'll be able to view those support and opposed bills, in fact all the bills we follow, on our legislative page on our website. In legislative action this week and coming up later in the month, we're getting into more and more broadband issues. Senate Bill 2 passed the Senate this week, was over at the House. Actually, it was recalled to the Senate today for a technical change. We expect it to go back over the House. Senate Bill 2, of course, is the legislation that would free up high-cost support mechanism money for the Broadband Deployment Board. We're a little concerned about that bill because there are a lot of folks that are patting each other on the back and high-fiving each other about all the good things that they think will happen with that bill. We're concerned because the minimum speeds were downgraded in the bill such that we're fearful that broadband deployment that occurs with those dollars will be much less than the FCC standard of 25 megabytes down and 3 megabytes up. And that's some concern, as well as a number of other amendments. CML is still neutral on the bill, but we're going to be keeping a very close eye on it as it moves to the House with the Speaker of the House and the House Majority Leader as the prime sponsors. Related to that, House Bill 1199, which won't be heard until later in the month, deals with the right of first refusal when someone receives a broadband grant. The incumbent provider, which is usually CenturyLink but not always, has the ability to take over that grant but is not required to provide the same level of service or at the same price that the grant recipient was going to provide it at. That's going to be an interesting argument before the House committee that it's in, and we'll look forward to supporting that bill later in the month. Moving to severance tax, a very important piece of legislation was introduced. CML has for years been advocating about protecting severance tax. House Bill 1201, which is carried by Representative Dan Thurlow and will be sponsored in the Senate by Senator Don Quorum, would refer a debrucing question to the voters in November if adopted by the General Assembly and signed by the governor. This is important because the legislature has shown that it can't keep its hands off severance taxes, and even though receipts aren't that great right now, it's a good time to refer a debrucing question to ensure that if we do exceed our Tabor cap in the future, that those severance tax revenues are protected. Last but not least, a draft of beer and liquor legislation dealing with fermented malt beverage licenses and how they'll be dealt with after January 1st, 2019, was shown to stakeholders, and there's a stakeholder meeting on Monday, February 12th. As drafted, that bill has a lot of problems and unfortunately is not going to be consensus legislation. We'll see how that moves forward, but the concern is that things that CML had asked for that were non-controversial will get lost in the shuffle. We'll keep you posted on all that as it develops. We expect beer and liquor to be a subject matter all the way through the end of the session.
Next week, House Bill 1072, which is a prohibition on red light cameras and photo radar, is up in the House Transportation and Energy Committee. CML is absolutely opposed to that legislation, and several municipalities will be down to testify in opposition and talk about why the use of red light cameras and photo radar really should be a local solution and a local decision. And we're also going to talk about the public safety concerns and why our communities actually want them as well.
House Bill 1071, which would codify the Martinez decision, which would require the COGC to protect the general health, safety, and welfare of Colorado residents before oil and gas operations could go forward. That bill passed on third reading this week, and it will be introduced into the Senate and signed to a Senate committee probably next week. Also, we had Senate Bill 5, which is the Rural Advancement of Colorado Towns Act, which would provide state resources and assistance to local communities that suffered some sort of an economic calamity within their community, plant closure, a hospital closing, something like that, that would create job losses and the need for state assistance. And that bill we thought was going to die, but it miraculously passed at the last minute. Senator Ray Scott joined Senator Donovan as a co-prime sponsor on that bill, and they got it out of State Affairs 3-2. So that is headed for the floor on second reading, probably next week.
I'm going to talk about a couple of bills that are up next week on Valentine's Day. The first is 1084. This is the expansion of the use of county lodging tax. And due to a variety of reasons, there were concerns from some of the groups that do the marketing and advertising for tourism in those communities, as well as some of the other concerns. The bill is not going to move forward. The counties have said they're no longer going to pursue it this year, and the sponsor is going to, when the bill is brought up on Wednesday in House Finance, is just going to just let it lie for the year. The second bill, also up later in the day in House State Affairs, is 1128. This is a bill that came out of the Attorney General's office after the Equifax data breach and similar data breaches of personal information. Like other states' Attorney General that are looking at beefing up data privacy and data breach notifications, our Attorney General has proposed kind of beefing up those provisions. The local governments were not really in the bill as introduced, and we do a lot of maintenance of PII is what it's called in our records, and we kind of zealously guard that information. I think that may have been why we weren't in the bill as introduced, as it was really kind of seen as an issue more on the private entity side. But there were kind of last minute changes proposed to the bill late last week. It had previously been set for this week, but was held over as those amendments came through, including amendments that would have written governmental entities into the bill. So we're sending that out for comment. If you have received an inquiry from me, please take a look at that. But we'll be interested to see what comes out in that committee amendment next Wednesday.